Rain tapped gently on the pawnshop window like a forgotten lullaby. Inside, the air smelled of rust and time. Worn guitars hung like ghosts. A cracked trumpet rested beside a stack of dusty clocks. And there, in the corner, was the violin. Its wood faded, strings slack, but still holding something. Alive! A man stepped in, water dripping from his coat sleeves. His name was Jonah, mid-40s, janitor, tired eyes that once held music. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a chain with his late wife's locket. His fingers lingered over it. "This cover it?" he asked, voice low. The shopkeeper squinted. "Almost." Jonah sighed, removing his wedding ring. Thin, dull, but worn with love. He slid it across the counter without a word. The shopkeeper weighed both items, then lifted the violin gently. "This one carries old stories," he warned. "You sure?" Jonah nodded. "I'm not buying wood and strings. I'm buying a door." The shopkeeper raised a brow. "To what?" Jonah smiled softly. "To whatever she hears when she closes her eyes." Outside, thunder grumbled over the city. Inside, Jonah held the violin like it was breakable hope. He tucked it into a tattered cloth bag, careful as if it might shatter. As he turned to leave, the shopkeeper called out, "She plays already?" Jonah hesitated. "Not yet." He opened the door, letting in the cold. "But she will." The bell jingled overhead. The door shut. The violin, once forgotten in the corner, now rested against Jonah's chest, cradled like a fragile second chance. And behind him, the shopkeeper stared after him a moment longer, whispering under his breath, "Old stories don't rest easy." The apartment was buried beneath street level. A concrete box with peeling paint and one window the size of a shoebox. Winter leaked through the walls. The heater wheezed like an old man dying. Jonah laid the violin case on their small wooden table. It creaked under its weight. Not the violins, but the hope inside it. Across the room, little Lila sat cross-legged, sketching music notes in a notebook that had more doodles than lines. "It's for me?" she whispered. Jonah nodded. "Found it in a treasure chest." She opened the case. Her fingers traced the violin like it might disappear. The first sound was a squeak, the second a scrape. Then, silence. Jonah crouched beside her. "You don't have to be perfect." "But Mom was," she whispered. Jonah's smile faded. "She just practiced longer." Lila nestled the violin under her chin. She closed her eyes, drew the bow. The note that followed wasn't perfect. But it wasn't wrong either. It was raw, pure, like something waking up. That night, dinner was a can of beans and a split slice of bread. They sat on the floor, wrapped in shared blankets, the violin between them. Lila played, slowly, awkwardly, then confidently. The music filled the apartment like warm light, bouncing off the old fridge, the cracked sink, the mold on the corner wall. It wasn't Carnegie Hall, but it was theirs. Upstairs, a neighbor paused by the vent. He pulled out his phone. "Hit record." Lila swayed, bow gliding gently. Jonah watched her silent, his stomach still empty, his hands blistered from work, but his heart full. And somewhere in the vent above, a red light blinked. Miles away, in a dim study lined with dusty books and faded music scores, Arthur Langley sat alone with his tea. Former concertmaster. Retired. Widowed. The kind of man who spoke more with his eyes than his mouth. He scrolled aimlessly on his old laptop, clicking through videos in the inbox from his former students. One video was unlabeled, blurry. The audio crackled. He almost skipped it. Then, he heard it. A child's violin, rough yet heartbreakingly sincere. The melody was fractured but full of soul, imperfect, but alive. Arthur leaned forward. She played like she was trying to remember a dream. The notes trembled, then steadied. A child searching for her mother in sound. Arthur pressed replay. Then again. He wiped his glasses. The next morning, Jonah opened the door to find a man in a faded trench coat holding a printed screenshot from the video. "I'm not a salesman," Arthur said calmly. I'm a violinist, or I used to be. Jonah's eyes narrowed. You want money, you're out of luck. Arthur shook his head. I want to hear her play again. Inside, Lila peeked from behind the curtain. Arthur smiled gently. Do you know what she did in that video? Jonah folded his arms. Played a cheap violin? Arthur looked him in the eye. She made it weep. Silence. Arthur set his worn satchel on the ground. Let me teach her. Free. Just once. If she's not ready, I'll leave. Jonah hesitated. Lila stepped forward, gripping her violin. She didn't say a word. She just lifted it, closed her eyes, and played. Arthur didn't move, didn't breathe. When the last note faded, he whispered, Who taught her to feel like that? Winter stretched long like a song without a chorus. Arthur came every Tuesday and Thursday. Never late, never loud. Just him, his worn music sheets, and the way he listened with his whole soul. Lila bloomed slowly, like a song learning itself. One night, after a long shift scrubbing floors, Jonah sat on the edge of his mattress watching her practice. Her fingers now sure, her bow steady. The room had no heat, but her music brought spring into the corners. Arthur had mentioned a youth orchestra audition, a scholarship program. Prestigious. Impossible. Jonah didn't say anything to Lila. But later that night, while she slept under a pile of jackets, he sat with her violin beside him and filled out the application in crooked handwriting. Parent name, Jonah Reed student. Name, Lila Reed. Experience, none. But she plays like the violin owes her an apology. He didn't know what to write for income, so he just scribbled, It's complicated. He mailed it the next day, envelope bent, fingers cold. He told no one. Weeks passed. Lessons continued. He forgot the application completely, until one cold morning, as he walked in from another graveyard shift, he saw it, a thick envelope wedged under the door. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside, an acceptance letter, and a golden invitation to audition. Jonah stared at it for a long time, chest rising slowly. Then, from behind him, Lila's small voice. Dad. What's that? Jonah turned, eyes wet. A chance, he said, voice cracked. That's what it is. The audition building smelled like money. Polished floors, white walls, chandeliers for ceiling lights, the kind of place where whispers echoed longer than voices. Lila clutched her violin case, hand trembling. Around her, kids in tailored coats tuned their pristine instruments. Their bows looked brand new. Their shoes shined. Their parents tall and confident. Jonah stood beside her in his worn janitor's coat, shoulders hunched, trying to blend into the wallpaper. A boy laughed nearby. Someone brought a garage sale violin? Lila's cheeks flushed. Jonah leaned in. Play like they can't afford your story. She nodded, swallowing fear. A woman called her name. Lila Reed, audition room C. The hallway stretched forever. Her footsteps echoed like drum beats. She stepped inside. 4 judges. A long wooden table. A black piano in the corner. One judge looked up without smiling. You may begin. Lila opened her case. The violin let out a soft sigh as she lifted it. Her hands were ice. She closed her eyes, breathed, and remembered. Her mom's lullaby from the hospital bed. The sound of beans in a tin can. The way her dad hummed while mopping floors. Her bow touched. String. The first note cracked. She faltered. Eyes darted to the judges. Stone faces. She looked through the glass window. Jonah stood there, mouth silently forming 2 words. Just breathe. She did and played. Not to impress. Not to win, but to speak. The room filled with something ancient, something aching. One of the judges dropped her pen. Another leaned forward, stunned. The boy from earlier, watching through the glass, fumbled his phone. It clattered to the floor. Lila's bow floated, her fingers dancing like raindrops. And the silence was gone. The envelope came 3 days later, thick, gold-edged with her name in elegant script. Jonah found it on the kitchen table, resting on top of bills they couldn't pay. He turned it over, hands rough from bleach and cold water. Lila watched him, wide-eyed. He opened it slowly. "We are pleased to invite Lila Reed to the National Youth Showcase at Carnegie Hall." Jonah stopped reading. His eyes scanned the rest: travel dates, dress requirements, accommodations not covered, uniforms not included, $608 for registration. Another page detailed the preferred attire: black gown, performance heels, professionally cleaned instrument. Jonah folded the letters silently. Lila's voice barely broke the silence. "Did I not get in?" He smiled gently, brushing her hair behind her ear. "You got in, baby. You got all the way in," she beamed. But behind his eyes, panic. That night, while she practiced Bach with a flashlight clipped to a broomstick, Jonah stared at a cracked mug filled with loose coins. He added up everything, subtracted sleep, multiplied the cost of bus rides, food, dresses, shoes. It didn't fit. None of it fit. Arthur came by the next morning. Jonah handed him the letter. Arthur scanned it, jaw tightening. "She deserves this." Jonah nodded. "That's what scares me." Arthur looked up. "You can't let this slip away." Jonah folded the letter once more. His fingers trembled slightly. "She's going," he said firmly. Arthur blinked. "How?" Jonah shrugged. "I'll figure it out." Arthur stepped closer. "You mean bleed for it?" Jonah nodded once. "Then I will." The city never slept, but Jonah slept even less. By day, he scrubbed school hallways with a mop older than his boots. By night, he cleaned floors at an office building downtown, the kind with glass walls and elevators that played classical music. His hands cracked, his knuckles bled, his back began to ache in a way that felt permanent. But every time his body screamed, he thought of Lila, twirling in their kitchen, violin tucked under her chin, smiling at sheet music like it was a secret love letter. He kept her Carnegie letter folded in his wallet. Whenever he wanted to quit, he touched it like a prayer. The third week, he added a weekend shift. No days off. He started drinking coffee through a straw to keep his hands working. Lila noticed. "Your eyes look tired," she said one night, climbing into bed beside him. "Nah." Jonah smiled, kissing her forehead. "They're just full of dreams." At the office building, he started seeing double. The mop dragged slower. His breath shortened, but he never missed a single shift. One night, after 12 straight hours of scrubbing grout on the third floor, Jonah reached into his bag to grab water, and instead pulled out Lila's music folder. He had brought it by mistake. He sat down, rested it in his lap, ran his fingers over her handwritten notes, and smiled. That was the last thing he remembered. When the morning janitor found him, Jonah was slumped against the wall, eyes closed, fingers still resting gently on the folder. A single page had slipped out. A sketch of a stage with stick figures. One big, one small, holding hands under golden lights. The bus pulled into New York just past midnight. The city glowed like it had swallowed the stars and scattered them across its windows. Jonah stepped off first, one hand gripping a cracked leather suitcase that once belonged to his father. In the other, Lila's violin case, held tight like glass. Lila followed, her eyes wide, lips parted. It was her first time seeing buildings taller than the sky. "Is this all one city?" she asked softly. Jonah chuckled, tired. "Feels like it's bigger than most countries." They walked 3 blocks to a motel with a flickering neon sign and a desk clerk who didn't ask questions. Their room had one twin bed, a buzzing light, and a heater that sounded like it might explode. Lila sat on the bed, bouncing once. "This is nice," she whispered. Jonah smiled. "Luxury suite," he said, "complete with view of someone else's alley." He opened the suitcase. Inside, 2 changes of clothes, 1 pair of shoes they'd share for photos, and a plastic hanger for the black dress Arthur had helped find from a thrift shop. On top, he placed her violin case. Lila opened it. Inside was a small, folded piece of paper tucked beneath the velvet lining. She unfolded it slowly. In Jonah's uneven handwriting, "No matter what happens out there, I'm already proud." Lila didn't speak. She just pressed the note to her heart and looked out the window, where city lights danced like they were listening. Jonah sat on the floor, back against the wall. His eyes closed, feet sore, but heart steady. Tomorrow, everything would change. But tonight, they had made it. The marble steps of Carnegie Hall were colder than they looked. Jonah held Lila's hand as they climbed, his grip firm, hers shaking. Inside, the ceilings arched like cathedrals. Velvet seats stretched endlessly. Golden trim wrapped around balconies, where ghosts of legends probably watched in silence. Backstage was a maze of whispers and echoing footsteps. The smell of rosin and perfume hung in the air. Lila stood in line with 20 other young musicians, all in pressed gowns and polished shoes. Her dress fit well, but her violin still looked like it had lived too many lives. She stared at the floor. Jonah squeezed her shoulder. "You okay?" She nodded too fast. A stage manager approached. "Miss Reed, you're next." Lila's throat dried. They led her to the edge of the curtain. She peeked through. Thousands of eyes. Rows upon rows. Camera flashes. Judges. Critics. Strangers. She clutched her violin like it might run. Jonah crouched beside her. "Look at me," he whispered. She did. "Remember the basement?" She nodded. "It's still just you and the music. All this?" He gestured to the crowd. "They're just lucky to listen," a voice called out. Next performer, Lila Reed. She stepped onto the stage. The lights were blinding. The silence, deafening. She positioned the violin. Her bow hovered. Her knees trembled. In the front row, Jonah leaned forward. She looked at him. He mouthed slowly, "Just breathe." She inhaled and began. One note, then another. Her bow steadied. Her spine straightened. Carnegie fell into silence, not of judgment, but awe. The room became the basement again, and the girl with the old violin played like she belonged among giants. The room held its breath as Lila moved into the second movement. The notes fluttered like birds finding their wings, each one more confident than the last. She was no longer a girl on a stage. She was the music. She was the story. Then, snap! A sharp twang split the silence. Her A string had broken. Gasps rippled through the audience like a wave hitting glass. Judges leaned in. Someone in the balcony whispered, "She's done." Lila froze. The violin sagged slightly in her hands. Her heart raced. Her breath caught. This was it. Her nightmare. The kind she'd had every night leading up to this. Jonah stood halfway up from his seat. Fists clenched. Lila's eyes flicked to him. He didn't mouth words this time. He just placed his hand on his chest. The message was clear. Play anyway. She repositioned the violin. Her fingers adjusted. Her bow hovered, then fell, and something new began. She improvised. The missing string changed the melody, but she filled the gap, not with panic, but feeling. Each note carried weight, each shift a risk, but somehow it worked. A hush fell again, but this time, deeper, more reverent. She wove sorrow into her phrasing, hope into each rise, and rage. Rage against every cracked floor, every empty fridge, every laugh she'd heard. About her pawnshop toy, people didn't breathe. Jonah's eyes filled as her playing, bent rules and stitched something greater than the original score. Her violin broken, her heart wide open. And still, she played. She didn't know what key she was in anymore. Didn't care. The strings sang, even the broken ones, because her soul had taken over. Lila's fingers moved not with training, but memory. Each note stitched together a life no one in that room had lived, but every heart now felt. Her bow slowed into a minor key. The sound softened. A tin can of beans splitting between two spoons. A lullaby hummed from a hospital bed. The rustle of thrifted pages from an old music book. The soft click of her dad setting down his mop at 3 a.m. The sound of one man giving up sleep so she could chase a dream. Jonah leaned forward, eyes shimmering. To others, it was a performance. To him, it was a confession in sound. One of the judges had a hand over her mouth. Another sat back, blinking too much. From behind the curtain, Arthur watched too. His fingers curled around the doorway, jaw set like stone. And Lila? She wasn't watching anyone. She was inside the music, inside herself. Her violin shook, but her heart didn't. The final note didn't crash. It whispered. A soft sigh, like the music itself didn't want to leave her. Then, silence. A beat. Then another. And then, like thunder, the room exploded. Not applause, a standing ovation. A flood, a roar. A woman in the third row wiped her eyes. A critic dropped her notepad. Lila stood motionless, eyes wide. She turned slowly and found Jonah. Still seated, hands pressed together, eyes full of tears. Pride, pain, everything. Backstage was chaos. Photographers shouted names. Program directors buzzed around like bees in blazers. Lila stood near the dressing room door, violin clutched tight. Drowning in congratulations she didn't understand. Jonah found her in the corner, sitting on the floor, shoes off, cheeks flushed. "You did it," he whispered. She looked up. "No, we did." Before he could reply, a tall man in a midnight blue suit approached, clipboard in hand, polished smile too sharp. "Mr. Reed?" Jonah stood, cautious. "I'm Greg Fulton, director of the Eastman Academy. We'd like to offer Lila a full scholarship, housing, travel, all included." Jonah blinked. "That's generous," Greg smiled wider. "She has it. We can't let her talent waste away in basements and city buses." Lila looked between them, heart thudding. Jonah's smile faded slightly. "What's the catch?" Greg chuckled. "No catch. Just commitment. Lots of it. Travel, tours, summer programs, most overseas. We mold prodigies, Mr. Reed." Lila's voice was small. "Overseas?" Greg nodded. "Europe. Asia. Wherever genius takes her." Jonah stared at the floor. His calloused fingers curled. Lila's face beamed. "Until, we'd prefer legal guardianship papers signed. No delays. Kids travel easier without complications." Silence. Jonah stiffened. "You want me to what?" Greg smiled tightly. "Just consider it. You can still visit. But she deserves everything, even if you can't come with her." Lila's throat caught. Jonah didn't yell, didn't shake. He simply whispered, "I carried her this far. And now you want me to hand her over?" Lila looked at him, then at Greg. Tears welled. "Why can't we just say yes for once?" Arthur stood in the motel doorway the next morning, eyes heavy, coat dusted with city grit. Jonah opened the door slowly, his expression unreadable. "You heard?" Jonah asked. Arthur nodded. Every word. Lila wasn't in the room. Just the violin resting quietly on the windowsill, bathed in gold morning light. Arthur stepped in, eyes settling on the instrument. "It's time you knew," he said, voice like worn pages. "That violin wasn't always sitting in a pawn shop." Jonah crossed his arms. Arthur continued softly. 30 years ago, it belonged to a girl named Elise Hartwell, prodigy, only child of a seamstress and a coal miner. She played like no one else, until illness took her before she reached the stage. Jonah glanced at the violin. It looked smaller now, or maybe heavier. "She never performed publicly," Arthur went on. "Her mother sold it when the hospital bills came. I was her teacher." Jonah blinked. Arthur's voice cracked. "I kept looking for someone who could carry what she left behind. That violin's been waiting a long time." Jonah sat on the edge of the bed, silent. Arthur walked to the window, watching the city bustle below. "You're afraid she'll leave you behind," he said gently. Jonah looked up, jaw tight. "I'm afraid she'll forget who held her up." Arthur turned to him. "But what if this is how she remembers you?" Jonah's eyes flicked to the violin, cracked, stubborn, still singing after all this time. Arthur whispered, "It waited for the right hands." And found them. Jonah didn't tell Lila what Arthur said. He just watched her more closely. Watched the way she held the violin tighter when she thought no one was looking. Watched the way her eyes lit up at the thought of Europe, dimmed when he changed the subject. He tried to keep up, kept working 2 jobs, 3 if someone called in, skipped meals, took painkillers with coffee. He told himself, just until she leaves, then I can rest. But his body had other plans. On a Tuesday afternoon, inside a restroom at the office tower, Jonah collapsed. His mop slid from his hand. His knees gave way. His vision flickered. He was rushed to the ER. Lila came running in with Arthur. Her cheeks were blotched, her dress still half-zipped from rehearsal. The doctor pulled her aside. His kidneys are strained. Severe fatigue. If he doesn't stop now, she didn't finish. Lila walked into the hospital room. Jonah lay still, a pale wire frame of the man who once carried her to bed after nightmares. She sat beside him, shaking. "Why didn't you tell me?" No answer. She reached into his coat for tissues and found an envelope. Old, folded twice. Her name in his handwriting. She opened it slowly. "Lila, if I don't wake up, no, I didn't stop because I gave up. I stopped because I gave everything. You were never a burden. You were the music. Keep playing. Even if I'm not in the front row." She pressed the letter to her lips, breath-catching. Her father had bled dreams into her future. And now, she had to carry the rest. The lights of Carnegie Hall glowed warmer this time. Lila stood backstage once more. But her world had changed. Her dress fit better. Her fingers were steadier, but her heart ached heavier. Jonah couldn't come. Still too weak, the doctors said. Still hooked to IVs, still sleeping too much. But she carried his letter in her violin case. She stepped out to the stage, alone. This wasn't part of a competition. It was a feature showcase now, a solo earned. She walked to the center, stopped at the mic, and faced the crowd. "Before I play," she said, voice trembling, "I want to dedicate this to someone who taught me what music really means." The audience quieted. He didn't know chords or scales, but he knew sacrifice. He knew love that didn't ask for applause. She reached into her case, pulled out the folded letter, and set it on the music stand. "This is for my father, Jonah. Read." She raised her violin. The hall stilled, and she played. It wasn't perfect, it didn't need to be, it was raw, honest. It ached in all the right places. Each note thanked him for cold dinners, for bruised hands, for letting her chase something he'd never had. The melody rose, hope wrapped in sorrow. When she finished, she held the final note just long enough to feel the tears fall from her cheeks. Silence. Then, a single clap. Then another. Then a wave, a full standing ovation. Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled. The room surged. Backstage, a reporter waited for her. "What drove you to play like that?" Lila smiled, voice soft. "I wasn't playing a song. I was telling the story of the man who gave me one." Months passed. Jonah healed slowly, like winter loosening its grip. His hands stopped trembling. His eyes grew clearer. He still walked with a limp, but he carried himself like a man who had nothing left to prove. They moved into a small brick house on the edge of town. Modest, creaky, sunlit in all the right places. A gift from the Eastman Foundation, along with a scholarship letter signed in gold ink. Full ride. No strings attached, but Jonah had only one condition. "She stays with me." They agreed. The living room became a music room. Second-hand chairs circled mismatched music stands. A chalkboard listed lesson times in Lila's handwriting. She began teaching local kids, for free. Kids with calloused hands, scuffed shoes, stories no one had listened to. She listened. Every afternoon, notes spilled from the open windows. Not polished, not perfect, but real. Jonah sat on the porch with coffee that wasn't instant anymore, tapping his foot to whatever melody floated through the walls. Arthur visited sometimes, leaving behind old sheet music and newer smiles. One morning, Lila opened a package on the porch. Inside, a violin. New, smooth, expensive. She stared at it, then looked at the old one. Cracked, worn, quiet now. She hung it on the wall. Above it, she pinned a photo. Her and Jonah standing in front of Carnegie Hall. He had his arm around her. She was still in her performance dress. His smile looked tired, but full. Beneath the photo, she taped a small, faded note. No matter what happens out there, I'm already proud. The music never stopped in that house. It lived in the walls. It remembered, and the violin that once wept in silence now rested like a crown. Silent, but never forgotten.